Literary criticism is often considered to be a headache for many UGC Net English aspirants. But what if I told you that it is the easiest subject to crack with the right approach? My name is Riya Gandhi and welcome back to my channel. This video is episode 5 of the UGC Net English lecture series, and in this video we will break down how to tackle literary criticism and cover some of the most essential tips and strategies that will help you ace the exam.
Friends, as you already know that literary theory and literary criticism will occupy a significant portion of UGC Net English exam. And in one of the sessions that I was taking, one of the students told me that she is facing a lot of difficulty in learning literary theories for her UGC Net English exam in January. And I've realized that it is very difficult for other UGC Net English aspirants as well. So I decided that we should make a video on how to tackle literary theory for UGC Net English exam, especially when you're giving in January. Here's what we'll cover. We'll begin this video with a brief and a quick overview of the history of literary criticism, followed by a discussion on some of the most important theories that are frequently asked in UGC Net English exam, and then finally discuss some of the most important tips and strategies that I used while I was preparing for my UGC Net English exam. So let's first begin with a quick overview of the history of literary criticism. The very origins of literary criticisms can be traced to the classical literary criticism, mostly identified by Plato and Aristotle. Some of the most famous works you can say of Plato are the Republic, the Ion, and you have Aristotle's The Poetics. In both of these works, although they are talking about two very different ideas, where Plato is going against poets and poetry, and Aristotle on the other hand is defending poetry. But both of these, you can say, philosophers, they have focused upon poet being the imitators and poetry being an art of imitation. In this period, you also have other writers and philosophers like Horace, Longinus, the idea of sublime. All of these are also very important from UGC Net point of view. Moving on to the next stage, which is of the Renaissance criticism. Now, we already know that in the history of British English literature, Renaissance was a period of revival, wherein a lot of ideas, especially the humanistic ideas, flourished during this period. So it is but obvious that literary criticism was also going to flourish. Now, who are the major critiques, or you can say the philosophers writing during this point of time? So the best example that I can give you of is of Sir Philip Sidney's Defense of Poesy. That work is considered to be one of the initiators of English literary criticism. Moving on to the third period, that is the neoclassical criticism. Now, when I'm talking about the neoclassical criticism, it roughly coincides with the neoclassical age or the Augustan age in the history of British English literature. In terms of criticism, you have Alexander Pope's Essay on Criticism. You also have John Locke's Philosophy of Tabula Rasa. Then the next stage comes the Romantic Age, or the period of Romanticism in the history of literary criticism. You definitely have William Wordsworth's preface to the Lyrical Ballads. You also have Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Biographia Literaria, which have significantly shaped the literary criticism of this particular period. And then comes the late 19th century, or the 19th century, which is often categorized under the Victorian age. And this age was basically marked by the rise of industrial capitalism. So the kind of literary criticism that flourished during this period was very traditionalist, because there were these two factions, as we discussed in the first lecture of this lecture series, where there were two factions between the believers as well as the non-believers. So you have Matthew Arnold, the traditionalist, who focused a lot upon taste, culture. So you have a lot of ideas like these as well. Now, apart from that, you also see the emergence of another group of poets and writers, the aesthetic school of poets and writers, whose basic maxim was art for art's sake. Now, type that out in the comment section below, that who basically propounded this statement of art for art's sake and is considered to be one of the primary figures associated with aestheticism in English literature. Now, moving on to the next stage, which was the 20th century. Now, 20th century was basically coinciding with the modern age in the history of British English literature. And as you already know, this age was the age of influences, where even literary criticism opened its gateways to various other influences, including linguistic influences, psychological influences, philosophical influences, right? And this was the age where you see a lot of other art movements also emerging. Movements like Surrealism, Dadaism, Futurism, Imagism, Vorticism, and all of that created a huge impact on not just literature, but also literary criticism. Now, all of these influences, especially the linguistic influence, led to the development of two major literary movements, namely formalism and new criticism. When I'm talking about formalism, it is largely associated with two important critiques, namely Victor Shklovsky and Vladimir Prop. Formalism, as the name suggests, requires the critique to pay attention to the formalistic characteristics of the text. So basically understanding the meaning of the text by understanding its meter, rhyme, features, plot, characters, all of those things. And when it comes to new criticism, it is basically focusing upon the close reading of the text, wherein you take into consideration the text to be very autotelic, which means that you don't need to depend upon any outside resources to extract meaning from the text. Now, this was a brief and a quick overview of the history of literary criticism. Now that we are done with this, let's move on and focus upon the first major literary theory, and that is Marxist criticism. Now, it emerged somewhere between the middle of the 19th century towards the later part of the 19th century, when Friedrich Engels and Karl Marx published the Communist Manifesto in 1848. Marxism, as an inherently political movement, focuses mainly upon equality between the rich and the poor. And when it comes to the literary sphere, it focuses upon understanding the characters, their actions, whatever they are doing in the background of the economic context. So understanding their class, their socio-economic backgrounds, where they are coming from, where they are living, all of those things have to be taken into consideration as a Marxist literary critique. One of the most important concepts provided by one of the most important Marxist critiques is hegemony, that was provided by Antonio Gramsci. I have covered more about hegemony in detail in this video. Now, moving on to the next literary theory, and that is psychoanalytic criticism, that emerged in the latter part of the 19th century, especially when one of the most important psychoanalytics, that is Sigmund Freud, contributed the ideas of id, ego, and superego. At the same time, he was also talking about the concepts of psychosexual development. Now, all of these ideas, they also percolated into literary criticism. We already know that you have certain modern age writers like Virginia Woolf and James Joyce who have adopted the stream of consciousness literary technique after being inspired from these psychoanalytic ideas of Sigmund Freud. In literary criticism, psychoanalytic criticism involves uncovering and exploring the character's hidden desires and motives behind actions, possibly finding out their sexual desires also. Then, moving on to the third and the most important literary theory from UGC net point of view, and that is structuralism, which emerged somewhere from 1950s. Structuralism is basically a literary theory that focuses upon language as a system of signs and significations. In literature, if you are applying a structuralist theory, it basically involves finding out certain patterns in the text. And that again happens through understanding the plot, the characters, and finding out the universal plot patterns. We already know that when it comes to structuralism, one of the first initiators or the first critiques was Ferdinand de Saussure, one of the major and the most popular linguists associated, who provided the concept of langue and parole, at the same time established that language is based upon the principle of binary opposites. Next, moving on to post-structuralism that started to emerge from the 1960s as a reaction to structuralism. It was propounded by critiques like Roland Barthes and Jacques Derrida. And all of these critiques, they focused upon the fact that there is no inherent structure to language, let alone a text. They basically focused upon that when you are interpreting a text, there is no one particular meaning. There are subjective meanings, there are subjective interpretations, which leads to the plurality of meanings. Moving on to the next theory, we have reader response theory, which emerged in the 1970s. What is the focus of the reader response theory? Basically the reader, and focusing upon what the reader experiences while reading a particular book. Up until now, the focus was upon the text, the focus was upon the author's intentions, how they wanted to write a particular text, the formalistic characteristics of the text, but nobody focused upon the reader and what the reader experiences when reading a particular text. And then came the reader response theory, basically focusing upon the reader. It originated first in USA and then it traveled to Germany as well. One of the most important concepts associated with reader response theory is Stanley Fischer's concept of interpretive communities. Then moving on to the most important literary theory from UGC net point of view, we have post-colonial theory or post-colonialism that emerged in the 1980s. It originated with Edward Said's book Orientalism in 1978. Now, what is Orientalism? Orientalism is basically a concept which talks about how the Western countries have traditionally and historically portrayed the Eastern as well as the Asian countries. Now, the focus of the post-colonial literary theory is the study of the texts written by both the colonizers as well as the colonized. It is to study how the colonizers have represented and thought about the colonized in the first place. And it is also the way how the colonized have reacted, have protested through their works. Some of the most important post-colonial critiques are Homi Bhabha, Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak, and more. Most important and frequently asked theories in UGC Net English exam, we have feminist criticism. Similar to Marxist criticism and eco-criticism, feminist criticism also originated essentially from a political movement, and it led to the three famous waves of feminism. We also have a fourth wave of feminism, which is from 2008 to present, which inculcates technology and technological advancements for the development of the progressive ideas of feminist criticism. Also, here's an interesting fact about feminist criticism. That is, in 1837, the term feminism was coined by Charles Fourier. And you can say that feminist criticism, the official development of feminist criticism, started from Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Women that was published in 1792. We also have the emergence of queer theory that happened in the early 1990s and is also frequently asked in UGC Net English exam. The term queer was coined by Teresa de Lauretis, and it basically includes the combined area of LGBTQIA+. When you're talking about how queer theory is percolated or is taken into consideration from a literary perspective, it basically explores such relationships that are happening, or such relationships that are categorized under LGBTQIA+, and talking about their sufferings, talking about how they deal with it, how they are coming out of the closet, and so on and so forth. Now, with this, we end the discussion on some of the most important literary theories. I hope you found this discussion to be very informative and very helpful. Now that we are done with this, let's move on and discuss some of the most important tips and strategies that will help you ace UGC Net English exam, especially when it comes to the literary criticism portion. So my first tip to you guys would be that focus upon the key theorists and the concepts. Don't try to cover everything at the same time, because the problem would be that you would end up remembering a very little concept or very little information to whatever you have learned. So make sure that you create a list wherein you mention the key theorists, the concepts that they have provided, in which year did they provide, and in which work did they mention this concept. By this, you will be able to get a clearer understanding of not only the theory but also the concepts. Moving on to the second strategy, that is, understand the theories through examples and cheat sheets. Now, a lot of times it so happens that you are not able to understand literary theories, or why you feel it is so difficult to understand for your UGC Net English exam is because we are not able to clearly grasp whatever the theorists are trying to say. Because essentially speaking, since it is a critical theory, it requires a lot of efforts from our side to understand it completely, right? We need to simplify it. So make sure that when you read particular theory, you understand it thoroughly in a very simplified language. Maybe apply it to some other text or understand it with examples, make a mind map for yourself, which will help you get a clearer idea and a more simplified idea of the key ideas of those theories. And finally, the third strategy would be that when you are understanding the theories, arrange them in a chronological fashion. That's why in this video itself, I started with the Marxist criticism and ended with the queer theory. Why? Because it followed a chronological fashion. When you create a timeline for yourself in such a manner wherein you are able to arrange the theories in a chronological fashion, you will be able to integrate literary criticism with the history of British English literature. As in, you will be able to understand that when structuralism happened, what was happening in the history of British English literature? When Marxist criticism happened, what was happening in the Victorian age? When you are able to understand from these two different perspectives, you will get a much deeper and comprehensive understanding. And that will help you in acing UGC Net English exam. Now, these are the three of the most important tips and strategies that I would advise you to practice, especially when you are preparing for your UGC Net English exam for January. Now, what if I told you that you can get a focused understanding of these key theorists and concepts with mind maps and literary theory calendars? At the same time, all of them are arranged in a chronological fashion in just 1 hour. I have specially designed a 1-hour class for you in which I've tried to mainly cover upon literary criticism from UGC Net point of view. The title of the class is Literary Criticism Simplified. So in this 60-minute session, you can expect some of the key literary theories that I will be talking about, starting from structuralism, post-structuralism, down to critical race studies and queer theory as well. In this particular session, I'll also be covering some of the most important theorists and their concepts which are frequently asked in UGC Net English exam. Not only that, but we will also be solving some of the most important PYQs related to some of the most important theories, theorists, and the literary concepts. In this 1-hour session, you can expect simplified explanations of some of the most complex literary theories. I've broken down some of the most complex concepts in a very simplified and engaging manner, which will help you gain a quicker grasp of these theories. And all of this together combined will provide you the confidence to ace UGC Net English exam. To register for this particular course, you can take a quick look at this particular section of the page, wherein you can look at whatever days you would be available, the timings that are convenient for you, and just select upon the available timings and the days and confirm your slot.
That's it for today's video, folks. If you found this video for tackling literary criticism for your UGC Net English Prep informative and helpful, please like it and share it with other UGC Net English aspirants as well. Also, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss any videos that I will be uploading on such important topics and concepts related to UGC Net English literature in the future. Thank you so much for watching till the end, and I'll see you in the next one.